Hello everyone, welcome to Renal Rehabilitation Laboratory. This is you, a physical therapist. This time, I'd like to talk about this question. Is the length of hospital stay associated with the decline in ADLs among hemodialysis patients? Although the research of these topics are increasing now, the impact of length of hospital stay on ADLs has not specifically been investigated among dialysis patients. So, let's learn about it. Today, I'd like to talk about this prospective cohort study. Length of hospital stay is associated with a decline in activities of daily living in hemodialysis patients. Functional impairment is a strong predictor of quality of life and mortality among dialysis patients, as well as the general population. Among patients with end-stage renal disease, the prevalence of functional impairment is exceedingly high. An earlier study reported that more than 50% of all the dialysis patients exhibited dependency in ADLs, and only 5% were completely independent in doing both types of activities. Another study reported that approximately 60% of patients over 21 years who had been receiving maintenance dialysis needed assistance at least one of the 4 BADLs and the 7 IADLs. Several earlier studies have demonstrated that more than 30% of older patients developed new or additional dependencies in BADLs during a hospital stay. Another study demonstrated that the number of hospitalizations had a dose-response relationship with functional decline. From a practical perspective, the strategies used to reduce the number of hospitalizations might not clear-cut for hemodialysis patients, since they frequently have to visit hospitals to ensure effective care management. For this population, reducing the total length of hospital stay might be a more realistic target. This study aims to clarify the associations of the length of hospital stay and the number of hospitalizations with declines in BADLs and IADLs. This study used data from the Japanese dialysis outcomes and practice patterns study. In this study, they included 2,442 patients aged 40 or over who participated in JDAF's Phase 5. They excluded all patients who had already lost BADLs as was operationalized by dependency in at least 3 of the 5 BADLs at baseline. In addition, patients for whom changes in ADLs were evaluated for less than 90 days, in which the change in ADLs will occur sufficiently, were also excluded. They identified the occurrence of hospitalization based on the participants' medical records. Only those hospitalizations with more than a 2-day hospital stay were identified because 1-day hospitalization were assumed not influence the outcomes. They evaluated BADLs and IADLs using self-report questionnaires. BADLs were assessed using CUTS index, which asks participants to evaluate 5 tasks on a 2-point scale. IADLs were assessed using Lawton-Brody IADL scale, which asks participants to evaluate 8 tasks on a 3-point scale. (849) participants were included in the statistical analysis. Their mean age was 64.9 years, and 64.4% were men, and 36.3% had diabetes. 26.9 participants experienced at least one hospitalization with a stay of more than 2 days. The median of calculated length of hospital stay was 11 days. A decline in BADLs and IADLs occurred in 60.8% and 23.3% from the baseline and follow-up, respectively. A decline in bathing was occurred in 4% in the hospitalized patients, which was most frequently observed in BADLs. Among the IADLs, 20% of the hospitalized patients showed a decline in getting to place beyond walking distance. Even the IADLs showing the lowest proportions of decline had higher proportions than bathing. For all BADLs and IADLs, the proportion of decline was higher among hospitalized than non-hospitalized patients. The cumulative length of hospital stay was associated with an increased risk of decline in BADLs and IADLs, and the adjusted risk ratio of these were 1.012 and 1.011 per day. For age, the risk ratio of decline in BADLs and IADLs were 1.20 and 1.21 per 10 years increment, respectively. For diabetes, the risk ratio for declines were 1.36 for BADLs and 1.38 for IADLs. A restricted cubic spline curve analysis showed the linear relationships between the cumulative length of hospital stay and predicted probabilities of decline in BADLs and IADLs. The adjusted risk ratio for declines in BADLs among patients with 1 hospitalization and for those with more than 2 hospitalizations were 1.69 and 2.27 respectively. The adjusted risk ratios for declines in IADLs in patients with 1 and more than 2 hospitalizations were 1.41 and 1.39 respectively. The adjusted risk ratios for declines in BADLs and IADLs per 1-day increment in the cumulative length of hospital stay were 1.013 and 1.017 respectively among patients aged below 65 years, whereas there were 1.014 and 1.007 respectively among patients aged 65 or older. Among patients aged below 65 years, the adjusted risk ratios for decline in BADLs and IADLs were 2.65 and 1.38 among those with more than 2 hospitalized, respectively, compared to patients without hospitalization. Among patients aged 65 or older, the adjusted risk ratios for decline in BADLs and IADLs were 2.04 and 1.32 among those with more than 2 hospitalizations, respectively, compared to patients without hospitalizations. The impact of a 30-day increase in the cumulative length of hospital stay was comparable to that of a 10-year increase in age and having diabetes. These results suggest that clinical interventions and social support aimed at reducing the length of hospital stays might be an effective method of preventing declines in ADLs among dialysis patients. In the age group analysis, although a similar association between hospitalization and declines in ADLs was observed among patients in both age groups, the impact of hospitalization on the IADLs in older adults was similar than was reported for younger adults. This result suggested that the length of hospital stay had a significant impact on declines in both BADLs and IADLs among hemodialysis patients. In these patients, attempts to shorten the length of hospital stay as much as possible might help prevent ADL declines. That's all. Thanks for watching. What do you think about these topics? If you have any ideas, feel free to write it on the comments. See you next videos.